Hey travelers, did you know that a lot of Alaska is not connected by roads? I'm Kristen Kennan with the Traveling Cannonball, and today we're going to talk about bush planes. So a lot of Alaska doesn't have roads connecting it. Alaska's 2.5 times the size of Texas, but it has a population of about 730,000 people. As a result, it's really just not feasible to have roads to all of the locations. Not to mention, the winters and the snow that can fall in the winter can make winter maintenance really difficult. So some roads are actually even only open in the summers. So today we're going to look at the different types of bush planes and how you get to these remote villages. One of the questions that I was asked recently when I was telling somebody about having lived in a fly-in only community was, well, does that mean you have to have your own plane? Well, no. There are a lot of pilots in Alaska. There are more pilots per capita in Alaska than any other state. And there are more small airplanes in Alaska than any other state. In Anchorage, you'll find airports for both aircraft with wheels and aircraft with pontoons in the summer and skis in the winter. Matter of fact, over by Ted Stevens International Airport, there is a small plane runway, but there's also Lake Hood Seaplane Base, which is the world's largest seaplane base. Lake Hood, the planes have pontoons in the summer and skis in the winter. But there are also places where they're not even specifically airports where you'll find planes like that. For example, in Galena, Fish and Wildlife, as well as a few individuals had planes that they parked on Lake Alexander. And again, because the lake freezes in the winter, you have skis in the winter, but floats in the summer. But for most people like myself, we don't have our own planes. They're very expensive. I would love to get my private license. However, then I would want a plane, and the cost of a plane and the maintenance of a plane is really just too cost prohibitive, because that would basically take over my life. And as followers of the Traveling Cannonball know, I love to see the entire world. And so it's not a high enough of a priority for me. Anyway, so when you're flying to a fly-in only community, there are several ways you may get there. If you're going to a larger hub community like Nome, Kotzebue, Bethel, Utqiagvik, then there is jet service to those locations. So for example, when I lived in Kobuk, a small village about 30 miles north of the Arctic Circle, I would take a jet from Anchorage to Kotzebue, and then I would pick up my luggage and I would transport it to another part of the airport, which would be outside of the regular terminal building that you might think of, although for Kotzebue, the terminal building is just an Alaska Airlines building. And then I would take it over to, for example, ERA. ERA does not exist anymore. It has had many different iterations of what the airline is called, and it's no longer ERA. But I would take it over to ERA and recheck in. So the first thing to note is that when you're flying Alaska Airlines with an itinerary wholly in the state of Alaska, you're allowed to check 3 suitcases up to 50 pounds each. This is very useful because these small communities don't have much in the way of stores. They do all have stores, but they don't have a lot in their stores. And so people will go to town to buy many things, and if they're going to town, they'll always go shopping. So anytime I was flying wholly on Alaska Airlines, like when I lived in Nome, then I would make sure that I would have my 300-pound or my 350-pound totes. I would use Rubbermaid roughneck totes. And I would then have my carry-on and my personal item to max out everything that I could for taking goods there. I would buy in the stores lots of non-perishables and things that could be frozen. So any meat that I wanted besides locally caught meat like fish, moose, caribou, I would buy at the store and keep in a freezer. I would also buy cheese and keep it in the freezer, butter. I would even buy at Costco like the multi-packs of bell peppers and cut them up and freeze them as well. Big bags of spinach, I would eat some of them fresh, and then blanch. I would blanch the spinach and then also freeze that as well. And so freezing and non-perishables are huge, and so I would fill up my luggage with that. But when I've lived in the smaller villages, then you have much lower limits. For a number of those small bush airlines, you may only get 40 pounds for free. And for all of those airlines, you're only going to get a backpack as your carry-on. The planes are really small, so there's no room for the carry-on suitcase. They will absolutely 100% require you to check them. With some of the airlines, you can bring, like I said, only about 40 pounds for free, and that has to be one suitcase, and that's all you get. Anything else that you want to take with you, which frequently people want to take a lot more than 40 pounds when they've been in town, you're going to have to go to the freight office and ship it as cargo. Although a lot of times you will still see your cargo on the same plane. I know one time when I was flying to Galena, one of the airlines I was flying, I was hoping it would go on the same plane, and when I got on the plane, I was able to see there was my freight, and I was like, perfect, I won't have to come back to the airport to get it later. There is one airline that I really liked flying between Fairbanks and Galena. Matter of fact, this airline was originally, well, it is a cargo airline, but they added passenger service to Galena after another airline had gone bankrupt and quit flying to Galena during COVID, which was really helpful because for a while there was only one airline flying to Galena, and a lot of times there's very limited seats because these planes are very small. So the most common planes that fly in the bush are the Cessna Caravan, usually the Cessna Grand Caravan. A friend of mine calls this the flying lawnmower. Take a look at the picture. Let me know, what do you think? Does this look like a flying lawnmower? And then another very common plane that flies out to the villages in Alaska is the Piper Navajo. This one I posted on social media one time. Here's my ride. And a friend of mine from the lower 48 was like, that looks like a mosquito. So I now think of the Navajo as the mosquito plane. What do you think? Tell me in the comments if you think these planes look like lawnmowers and mosquitoes or something else. Now, each of these planes will seat about 8 to 10 people, although they may not seat that many because they change the configurations around for the cargo. The bush planes will double as both passenger and cargo planes because just like how the passengers have to get there by air, pretty much all of the freight has to get there by air. The communities mostly have barge service in the summer. So for example, Galena is on the Yukon River, so Galena has barge service on the river. Nome is on the ocean, so it'll have an ocean barge service, but both the rivers and the ocean freeze over. So these barge services have limited availability because they can't run when the river or ocean is frozen, but they also can't run during freeze up and break up. So the last barge is going to depend every year on how quickly the water is freezing, and then the first barge is going to depend on how quickly it breaks up and the ice moves out. So beyond that, even the cargo, the mail, all of that has to come by airplane. So they're moving seats around based on the number of passengers. And it's not unusual that if they have a lot of freight for one village, but they're picking up a lot of passengers either in that village or in another village, they'll go to the village where they're dropping off a lot of freight. They'll drop off the freight and then they'll pick up the passengers, and they'll have put the seats somewhere stored in the plane, depends on the plane as to where that somewhere is, and they'll reattach the seats to then fly more passengers back. They don't usually have a lot of backhaul freight, and backhaul freight is usually a lot cheaper because there is a lot less of it. So then when you go to check in, you have to give them your body weight, and they'll usually weigh your carry-on as well, because in these small planes, weight is very important. Personally, I love flying bush planes. I like them a lot more than jet planes. In a jet plane, you just really don't feel anything. Now, for most people, you might be going, yeah, Kristen, I don't want to be feeling it. But I love the bush plane. Matter of fact, they put me to sleep. Oh, always sleep on a bush plane, especially if it's light out and the sun's shining in the window, and then I'm like, oh, the thumb of the engine, and it's just so calm and relaxing, and I just go and I conk out. But sometimes I've even had flights where the weather was really rough and the plane might fly sideways or it bounces a lot because these planes are so small. There are a few other planes that'll fly to different villages depending on the airline and depending on the village. And so some of these planes are actually pressurized. The planes that I showed you already, the Caravan and the Navajo, they fly at very low altitude and they're not pressurized. Then you also have the 1900 and the Pilatus PC. When my parents came out to Galena to visit me, I made sure they flew in the 1900 because those two planes are a lot taller. They're still not really tall. I'm only 5'4", and I can't remember for sure. I think in those I have to duck just a little bit, but in the Cessna Caravan I have to bend over, and in the Piper Navajo I have to bend almost in half. And so I knew that for my parents, flying in a Navajo especially, but even in the Caravan, would be really hard having to bend over so far, especially for my dad, to try to work your way down the aisle. And so I tried to book them into the larger planes. Of course, the larger planes are also nice because they fly faster. Between Fairbanks and Galena, a flight can run you anywhere from an hour in a 1900 or a Pilatus PC to an hour and 45 minutes in a Cessna Caravan. A Navajo's about an hour and a half. And it all depends both on the size, the engine strength, and also the winds. Obviously, if there's a strong tailwind, the flight's going to be faster. If there's a strong headwind, it's going to be a lot slower. These airlines will often fill up, and this is basically the only way for people to get between some of these villages. A lot of times they will boat and snow machine and four-wheel as well between villages, depending on their location, and definitely into town where all the medical care is. I mean, there are clinics in the villages, but they have limited ability to provide medical care. So for example, one day when I was living in Galena, my arm swelled up really badly, and I went to the clinic, and in Galena we're fortunate enough to have a doctor, and the doctor was afraid that I had a DVT, but didn't have the equipment to check for that. and all of the commercial seats were taken. So we opted for me to actually go into town on a medevac. Now, in a lot of conditions, a medevac is going to be necessary in order to support the patient. But in my case, I could have flown commercially, but there were no seats available. And since there's no other way to get to a hospital that same day, we took the option to do that. Now, to give you an idea, the bill on that is about $46,000. Now, I actually paid nothing for it, and here's why. One, that's the pre-insurance bill. If you're not familiar with the United States, prices vary wildly with insurance or no insurance. It actually took the medevac company and my insurance company a long time, months and months, to finish fighting it out. In the end, if I had only had my health insurance, it would have cost me a little over $1,000 because the medevac was applied after all of my medical bills, and I only had a little over $1,000 left before I hit my out-of-pocket maximums for the year. But I also had medevac insurance that only cost me $50 a year for my entire family, and that medevac insurance covered everything that my insurance didn't. So it didn't cost me a penny, and I knew it wouldn't going in, which is also part of why I made that decision. But it was a hard decision, or it would have been a really hard decision without that medevac insurance, because the doctor really thought this was a DVT. She had the medication to break up a blood clot, and we discussed giving it, but we also discussed the effects if I didn't have a DVT, which could have resulted in terrible bleeding or other bleeding related issues because it's going to thin my blood. And in the end, I'm really glad we chose the medevac option because I didn't have a DVT. All right, so that's all for now. If you noticed my hand, I know when I was talking, my hand may have shown up. I'm actually in India right now. I shot this video before I left, but I didn't realize my dryer was running, and so I went to edit it right before I left, and it didn't work, and I'm like, oh, but I've already posted that this is a video that I'm gonna do, so I'm shooting this in my hotel room in Trichy, Tamil Nadu, India, and so there will be videos next week. I'm gonna start showing you about India. I'm having a fantastic time here, so make sure that you follow me and make sure you click that notification bell so that you do not miss the videos that are coming up. They're gonna be really awesome. And also, if you're looking to plan a vacation, whether it be to India, Alaska, or some other destination, the Traveling Cannonball would love to help you turn your travel dreams into a reality. All right, bye for now.